It's 11:05 WKRK Radio in Murphy, North Carolina. Tim Radford here, along with Sheriff Derek Palmer, as we have every Monday morning here on the radio. Good morning, Sheriff.
Good morning.
How are you on this fine, super dry Monday morning?
Kind of wet this morning. I told Tim before I come in, I said I got concerned when I was getting out of the car. I started seeing animals line up two by two.
Two by two.
Yeah. So I didn't know if that was a sign of something to come or what. But I think the rain's about over. I think we got about another day of it. But
yeah, I looked at the forecast and saw a 100% chance of rain on Monday for today. I was like, if it were 99.9%,
Right.
I'd feel a little bit better. But just seeing that 100%.
yeah, there's just something about it. You can't escape it at that point.
Yeah, someone asked me this morning why I decided to dress up as a pumpkin 2 days after Halloween. I'm like, this is just an orange shirt.
There you go.
Okay,
That's why I don't wear orange this time of year.
All right. How are things over the Halloween weekend? Any trouble reported?
No, it was actually a good weekend. I didn't get any reports of anything other than normal activity that was happening, and I think everything went pretty smooth with trick-or-treating and all the festivities in town and up in Andrews and all the things that's going on up there. I think it went pretty smooth. Had a pretty smooth weekend.
Well, very good. I know we had some rain coming in on Halloween night, so I don't know if that put a damper on a lot of people's plans.
I think it moved in late enough to where most people got their stuff done with their kids and everything, kind of got back home before it started raining. So it kind of drizzled and sprinkled a time or two, but I think the bulk of the rain held off until everybody got home.
There were a lot of good costumes people dressed up in. Some parents posted those on our Facebook page,
Right.
and just some very clever, creative costumes.
There were some very creative things this year. I noticed a lot of different things that you normally didn't see. And a lot of people's going after like reality TV kind of stuff. I see a lot of those kind of costumes going on of people that you kind of look vaguely familiar, but you can't figure out who they are, and then it dawns on you it's some reality TV star or something.
And then, of course, a lot of people carved their Halloween trumpkins.
Right.
Did you see the trumpkin?
I did. Actually, I saw one little boy who was dressed up like Donald Trump.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He had a comb over and everything. It was pretty cool.
Yeah. I don't remember back in our day that we had a lot of political costumes, but nowadays it's kind of rampant.
Right. It is. It is.
And all right, what all's going on in the sheriff's department right now?
Well, it's like I say, we're rocking right along. It's the call volume is still increasing. We've actually picked up a couple hundred more calls than we had last month. It's usually the time of year everything starts decreasing and starts getting calmer, but we're keep going more and more and more. I checked this morning, and for the month of October, the sheriff's office handled 3,300 calls for service in October, and that compares to about 1,000 to 1,100 in years past. So we're almost triple the calls for service. Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
We, of course, with social media and our cable TV networks that show so much, I wanted to kind of touch on the subject today because we did see an officer that basically using excessive force. When does an officer, we know that a lot of kids don't have the respect for officers or law enforcement or even any kind of authority figure, their parents for say, when does an officer, what is the exceptions that lethal force is used?
Well, a couple of things we have to look at that, and kind of analyze this just a little bit before we can have an intelligent conversation about it. And one of the things is when you see these things on social media and you see these things on television, a lot of times you only see maybe a 5-second snippet of the 30-minute altercation that happened.
Right.
And so what happens a lot of times is people see a 5 or 10-second snip of that, and they make a judgment based upon that snip.
Right.
One of the things with this resource officer, I think that you alluded to, was that there were other aspects of that as far as the student hitting the officer, punching at him, kicking, and some altercation that happened before he ever got to the room that played a factor in this. And I'm not giving him justification for doing what he did. I'm just saying there's other factors involved in that. One thing that we have to remember is that anytime force is used, whether it's lethal or non-lethal, you always second guess yourself, and you always go back and try to think of how we can do it different. And one of the things that we do at the sheriff's office with employees and with the patrol in particular, also with detention officers, is when we have a use of force form that's turned in, we try to evaluate that form and look at it, and not necessarily try to tell an officer he did something wrong, but look at it and sit down and say, okay, how could we have done this better? How could we handle it better? And sometimes there is no other option. Sometimes that's he handled it the best way he could handle it, But we always try to analyze those things and look back on those things, see where we can do it better. One of the things I was thinking about, this girl that this resource officer, I don't know the entire situation. I don't know what was going on there. But there's different things, that officer could have done. I mean, they could have cleared the room and got everybody else out of there, and they could have just sat down in a desk beside her and waited for her parents to get there. I mean, there's tons of things that you could do, but when you're in that situation, it's hard to second guess what an officer does because you're not there. You're not the one that's experiencing what he's experiencing. The one thing that I do encourage officers, not just my officers, but when I was a field training officer and training people on how to deal with people, one of the most important things about being an officer out there is not losing your temper. Because when you lose your temper, you make bad decisions. You make bad judgment calls. And so if you can keep your head and remain calm and stay calm, then you can think about things and make better decisions on what you do.
I was actually referring to a different case, but that was one of the, I was going to ask you when I saw about the detention, not the detention, but the school resource officer. The one I was thinking about when I was asking the question was, I guess it was a drug bust in a parking lot, and the cop was approaching the car, and the young man decided to flee, and the officer was saying he's trying to run over me, and then shot and killed the young man.
Right. And like I say, in those type of situations also, when it's lethal force type situation, you've got to remember that officer is making a split-second decision. He's having to make a decision based on what his visual acuity is and audio and what his surroundings, what's going on around him. So if you're looking at this 2 days later when everything's calm and your heart rate's not up and looking at it with clear eyes, you may look at these things and say, well, how could they make that kind of decision? That is not a good decision. But when you're the one that's in front of the car, or you're the one that's being shot at, or you're the one that the person's trying to beat up or stab, then when your adrenaline's flowing and your tunnel vision comes in and audio turns off, you've got to make split-second decisions, and sometimes it's not that simple.
I'm sure if he were watching the videotape a couple of days later and saw all the angles, his decision might be, I've been in the same situation. I made decisions, in the heat of the moment, and that was not exactly the right decision at that time.
And the thing about it too is how you perceive something and how something is in actuality sometimes is different. And it's kind of the same thing when people say stuff to you that may hurt your feelings, may make you mad, and that person didn't mean to do that. It's because you perceived it different than they put it out. And so a lot of times when people are trying to get away from the police or they're trying to do things, their actions may make the officer think they're trying to hurt the officer. When in reality they may not be. They may be just trying to get away. So like I say, it's all split-second decisions. It's very hard sometimes in those decisions to make a determination of whether lethal force is justified or not. And one of the things about lethal force that people need to understand is it's about, if you're in fear of your life, there may be circumstances going on that a person outside the scene looking at it 2 days later may say, well, there's no reason to be in fear for your life. But if you're the one that's on the scene, you may have reasonable fear that thinks somebody's about to kill you. So like I say, it's a judgment call, and sometimes you can look back on things and you just can't let things slide. And as an administrator and a supervisor, sometimes you have to discipline, sometimes you may have to fire somebody based on decisions they done, and sometimes it may get them in lawsuits and all kind of different things. But when you're the one making those decisions, sometimes it's just not that simple.
Earlier I said that a lot of kids don't have the same respect, but that's not just kids and adults. That level of respect isn't the one.
Well, we kind of talked about this just briefly a little bit on TV4 this morning. I do my once a month program on the first Monday there on TV4. And one of the things that I talked to Greg about this morning was, we as officers, we just have to assume. We just have to assume that wherever you're at, people are watching you, they're videotaping you, it's recorded. And even if we don't have a body camera on ourselves, or even if our car doesn't have a camera, if we're out in the public dealing with somebody, we just naturally need to assume somebody's got a cell phone, somebody's got a camera, somebody's recording it. So we have to remember that when we make those decisions, we have to try to stop and think when we can to make those decisions that what other people perceive it to be. And, sometimes, like I say, you have to do what you have to do to defend yourself and to effect the arrest that's in front of you, but it may be perceived differently by other people. So we just have to assume that it's been videotaped.
in the video in the classroom that you were talking about, there were several different angles. I guess students were recording the incident, and that's something that back in our day just didn't happen.
No,
but
there was no cameras.
Yeah.
And and the cameras can be good things and bad things. One of the things I used this illustration also this morning. We had an incident in one of our local schools where there was a student that was in some trouble. The resource officer went to the room, asked the student to come up to the office, talk to them about it. The student did. They went to the office. There was no issues, no problems. But when the student called it their parent, they told their parents that the officer had handcuffed them, that had drug them out of the classroom, had drug them up the hall, kicking and screaming basically to the office, and forced them to do these things. And of course, the parents were irate. Naturally, you would be if your child told you that. But when the evidence was looked at, because the school has cameras and had cameras in the hallways and things happened, it was clearly shown the student was walking on their own. They was not handcuffed. They were combing their hair, walking up the hall, and doing all kind of things, and freely. And the officer did not have hands on them, was not touching them. And so cameras can be good things. They can be your friends also. And one of the things I've always said about utilizing body cameras and in-car cameras is that I really believe that cameras make good officers better, and they'll weed the bad officers out.
Right.
I think that's true of cameras.
SRO, that stands for
School Resource Officer.
School. I wasn't sure if it's school or student.
Yeah.
So, at what point in our society did the SROs become prevalent in schools? We didn't have those growing up when we were in school.
Your inner city schools started in the late 80s, early 90s. They started really starting to put officers and metal detectors and stuff in the schools. And as time progressed on into the 2000s, then it started getting into more rural areas. But things really exploded with putting resource officers in the school when we had Columbine. And when all that happened, we had people coming in the school shooting in the schools, and it kind of exploded across the country as schools seeing the need of having officers in the schools to protect the children.
All right. Are SROs, are they part of the sheriff's office or part of the school system?
We have a little different system here in Cherokee County, and there's only about 6, I think, in the state that does it this way. But in Cherokee County, they are actually a company police. They are hired by the school system, and they work for the school system. They're employees of the school system. They do not work for the sheriff's office. They don't answer to the sheriff's office. They're their own police department. So they're basically hired police to the Company Police Act.
Okay.
Yeah.
You were in the schools quite a bit as an officer, and are there things that you saw in the schools that may surprise parents that may be oblivious to things that are going on in the school system?
The one thing that I saw in the schools that would really surprise parents is the child you drop off is not the child that's at school.
Okay.
That's the one thing that really surprised me when I went in the school system. A lot of the kids, and not all of them, it's not true of all of them. We have some very good kids in the school and very good kids in our county. But for a lot of the kids, the nice little polite kids that are dropped off at the door do not act that way while they're at school, and do not act that way while they're dealing with their peers and while they're dealing with their teachers. And then all of a sudden when the parents pick them back up of evening, they're the nice little polite kids again. And it really shocks a lot of parents when you show video footage and you show things at school, what their child did, that it leaves them surprised. It leaves them shocked that their child would do something like that. And I think I have the best children in the world. I'm kind of partial like everybody else. My kids are great, and I think I have the best children in the world. But after dealing with kids and being in the school system, I quickly realized that no matter how good your child is, that we're all capable of doing things that we normally wouldn't do, but under the right circumstances. So I'll just leave it at that.
So there's a home environment and a school environment,
right,
and they may not be the same,
right,
in different environments.
And I think that's the one thing that surprised me the most. And when I was in the school, I was looking at kids. I was pastor of church at the time, and I was looking at kids that I dealt with at church and seeing what they did at school, and understanding those same kids I saw on Sunday and what's in them Monday through Friday were two different kinds of kids. I was saying, and even kids I dealt with, my own kids, my family, things of that nature. It's just a different environment. Because of the different environment, people act differently and behave differently. And like I say, I don't want people to take that wrong, because I think we have great kids, and I think our school systems are full of great kids. And it's just like police officers and like everything else. Sometimes you can take one or two bad ones, and it kind of one or two spoils the whole bunch. That when we view these things, but for the most part, our schools are full of great young people in this area, and I'm proud to have them.
All right.
Yeah.
I read a news story, I think it was over the weekend, and I've been kind of watching for this day to come. I think it was Tennessee that within 2 years, people will be able to text 911 for emergency calls.
Right.
Is that something that is being looked at locally?
It is. We are looking at changing our CAD systems and stuff with dispatch right now, and because of upgrades and different things that's coming up. Every so often, you have to upgrade because computers wear out, as you can imagine. Right. The phone systems, the computer system, but dispatch, they run 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and so they're scheduled for upgrades after every so many years. And so we're looking at doing upgrades and changing the system, and that's one of the topics that are coming up. The state of North Carolina is actually mandating that the new dispatch centers have the text-to-dispatch capabilities to do that. When talking with dispatchers, and Janice Costello, that's our director down at Dispatch, when talking to them about this text 911, everybody obviously knows that there's a need for it, because if you have people who are speech impaired and things of that nature, they're able to still have contact with dispatch. But there's some very real concerns with that, as far as the texting, because you don't get the voice influx with that. Right. And our dispatchers depend a lot upon what they hear in the background and what's going on. If somebody calls 911 and says they need an officer, they depend on hearing that screaming and yelling in the background, things being said, maybe things breaking or guns being fired or whatever. So they depend on those things that they hear in the background to kind of determine the level of need, the quickness officer needs to respond, things of that nature, the priority of that call. And when you get the text to 911, you lose all that.
Right.
And so there's kind of somebody calls in and says they're having a domestic, for an example. It's kind of hard to determine whether this was something that happened a week ago and they're just wanting to talk to an officer now about it, or whether this is something that's going on right now and somebody's breaking things and screaming and yelling and they're in danger. Right. So that's one of the problems with that dispatchers are concerned about. Also with that is from time to time people call dispatch and then they say, they call back later and say, well, never mind, the person's left, or I don't need an officer now, or whatever. We still respond to those things and we still go to them. But with the 911 texting 911, it's kind of hard to understand whether that person is doing it under duress or whether they're legitimately left, whether things are okay, whether somebody's got a gun to their head and making them do it, Right. So it's kind of hard for the dispatcher to determine what's going on with that residence to keep the officer safe while responding.
Yeah. I know that sometimes you were talking about the voice inflection, that I've sent a text before, me being in, just perfectly fine answering question, and it's like, why are you being so rude? It's like people don't always translate your emotion through that text. But I can see situations like breaking and entering where maybe someone has broken into someone's house and a child is hiding under the bed trying to and could turn their phone on silent mode and then text for help that way. So I can see there's positive aspects along with the negative there as well.
And that's true with everything in life. As technology grows and we see new mediums and new ways of doing things, there's always going to be positive things and negative things with it. And I guess when they're looking at mandating these kind of things, I guess they're looking at the fact of trying to weigh that in a balance and see what's more important. And the general idea of that is if you can save some lives by having it, that outweighs the benefits, outweigh the negatives of the dispatchers not being able to read on all calls that come through there. The thing that's kind of discouraging that we want to discourage people on is not to text when you can call. Right. We want people to call, not to text. And so what I'm afraid of is when this capability gets widely known and people start using this and we upgrade our centers and we start using this, that especially the younger generation will just go straight to the texting because that's what they're used to doing. And their dispatchers are spending more time texting back and forth on calls than they are of actually talking with people and listening to what's going on.
People are becoming a very disconnected society as far as voice communication now, because kids don't talk like they used to. They just prefer typing on the phone. Even me in my young age, I text more than I talk on the phone.
And like even with texting, we talk about pros and cons. There's even benefits to that. For example, if I'm wanting to relay some information to you, and I don't necessarily care whether you get it now or whether you get it an hour from now or 2 hours from now, I'm just giving you the information. It's easier to shoot that to you in a text than it is to call and get into conversation about it and all those kind of things. And so there are some benefits even to texting on your daily lives that's beneficial to us. But I agree with you. I think a lot of times people's lost that closeness, lost that face-to-face contact, that inflection in the voice, body language, all those kind of things that we live on, that we grow on as babies, that we learn. Now we're adults and we don't use it anymore. We've lost it. And so I think it's very important to get back into that face-to-face contact and talk to people.
I remember when the internet first came out and there were chat rooms and things like that, and I think it was my mom. She says no one will ever talk to each other again face to face. Like, no, that's just gonna. And it brought a lot of people closer where they communicated more that would never talk on the phone. But then again, there is that disconnect still.
Well, one of the other problems with texting too is that people will say things over text and email and messaging that they would never say to somebody's face.
That's true.
And so you talk about the people saying being rude and stuff like that. Sometimes people will say things that are rude, or say things that will hurt people, or say things that's devastating to people, that if they were sitting with them face to face, they would never say it.
I see people picking fights every day on Facebook to people they have never met.
Right.
But it's like there's this constant need to win some kind of argument that a lot of people don't have a dog into the fight,
I shared with somebody just last week. They were talking about a Facebook deal where they was wanting to weigh into wasn't really an argument, but it was a discussion going on there. And I shared with this person. I told them, I said, listen, there's no need of even commenting on that stuff, because you'll never win. You'll never win. It'll be a never-ending saga and keep dragging on. And the people have one point of view, you're never going to change their mind. And the people has the other point of view, you're never going to change their mind. So just stay out of it. Don't get in there and get in those arguments.
And I see media being a problem, because a lot of the news stations or TV stations, and I try not to do this on my page, but they toss out a leading question and say, what do you think about that? What's your opinion? And it just...
And they get the 482 million responses that come to that.
So I don't like reading through. I don't like having to moderate things and look for profanity and things like that. So I just try to post information that people need to know, and then just leave it at that without the arguments.
Well, I have a few Facebook friends, and I'm sure you do too, that they do that on their own. They'll enter in some of these political questions and some of these other things and put it out there, and inciting responses to it, just to have conversation and debate over Facebook about these things. And a lot of times, when people get personal about things, I often look at my wife and I say, why don't they just send a personal message or private message about this? Why do they have to put it public for everybody to read and for everybody to weigh in on?
And I think that's one of the problems. We've been seeing all these about the debates, whether it be Republican or Democrat. I don't care which side it is. The debates are not fair like they used to.
No.
And I have to commend David Brown from the Cherokee Scout when we do these political debates.
That is probably the fairest debate setup that I've seen anywhere.
Yeah. People are asked the same questions.
Right.
And it's one of those, if people are trying to make informed decisions on which candidate to vote for president, there are so many targeted questions that are, instead of letting everyone answer the same policy.
Well, when I've been watching these presidential debates on both sides, the Democratic debates and the Republican debates, it seems like a lot of times the moderator's agenda is to try to get you with gotcha questions.
Exactly.
And try to get that person flustered or try to get them on some question they wasn't expecting, so they can make a name for themselves, or so they can make a sound bite for the news that night or something, And I'm like you. I would look for, and as a voter, I want a fair question, a fair debate, and let the person defend themselves on their stance, and get a true feeling for where people are. Because even, especially these Republican debates that's been going on, I've been watching these things and trying to see how people are going to answer these questions and what they're going to stand for. And as I'm watching this, the whole debate, they can't really get into what they believe and what they stand for and policies and what they want to do, because they're spending the whole time of the debate defending themselves and defending the question, that come their way. And so I think if the moderators would get away from these gotcha questions and get to just some point blank questions, tell me what you feel about this, what your plan, and let it go from there, I think the public would be better informed of what's going on.
And I'm sure the cable networks and they're ratings driven and money driven.
Right.
So the more viewers they get, the more money they make.
Right.
I mean, that's part of the process. And then I've always kind of watched the sensationalist journalists
right.
and how they respond. And back in the old day when we were growing up, people would tell the news and without the opinion. And
right.
I would love to see a nation get back to an unbiased newscast.
Well, when we were growing up and even before us, that's why reporters, anchors on the news, ABC, NBC, whatever they made, CBS was big at the time, and these major news anchors, that's why they gained so much respect in the United States, because they didn't play the gotcha questions and all that kind of stuff. They just reported the news as it was. And when people at home heard the news, they could believe the news and trust the news because these people didn't have personal bias in this stuff. This is just the way it was.
It all goes
Walter
back to
Cronkite,
respect.
and that's the way it was.
Walter Cronkite, yes, good news man.
Right. And so, I think that's one of the problems that is now that everybody is in such much, that's good terminology
such
there.
much.
Yeah. But people are in such a way of trying to sell their product that they've gotten away from the integrity and from the journalistic point of view of years past, and they're trying to come up with something to sell their product to make them better than the other news agency.
And I understand why people despise the media. I mean, we're part of the media here as a radio station, but I try not to play into that agenda.
Right.
So, but I understand why people have that distrust of the media because it is fueling a fire, baiting the trap type situation now instead of just being honest and straightforward with news.
Well, that's even like my political agenda and where I stand on things. I've dedicated myself to, and what I'm trying to hold firm to, and hopefully I do, is try to just stand on what I believe in and let people know where I'm at and what I think about things. And then when it comes election time, if the county decides they want to go in a different direction or with a different person, different leadership, that I can stand back and stand aside and say, okay, the people have spoken, they've got what they've asked for, and I can leave with my head held up and know that I did the best job I can do. But I think a lot of times because of the sensationalism and trying to please people and all that, even the political end of it, people try to get so wrapped up into that, instead of just standing for what they believe in. And I think if the media, if politicians, if all these people running for office would just stand their ground on what they believe in and tell people who they are and what they stand for, I think that we can get a whole lot better idea of what's out there and what's available to vote for and make a better informed decision.
I know when you were running for office, you probably got tired of hearing us read that disclaimer before every time your show came on, but I felt that was important that people know that it's going to be fair. Here's the rules that we follow and that everyone's going to be treated the same.
Right.
And I just think that's fair. And hopefully our nation can return to that kind of fairness.
Yeah. I hope that if I ever get to the place that I don't feel that way anymore, that I'd be willing to step aside on my own and not have to have the people put me out of office. I hope if I ever get to that place, I'd have enough integrity to do it on my own. But like I say, I think as long as I do the best I can do and make the best decisions I can make, keep the public in the forefront of my mind and do the best decisions I can make for our community, that I think we're in a good place in the sheriff's office, and I think we'll make good decisions, and that's just what I strive to do every day.
Very good. All right, Sheriff, any final thoughts?
No, I think that'll about do it. Everybody stay dry out there today, and hopefully this rain will move out pretty soon.
All right, looking at Tuesday, I don't see any raindrops from the cloud on the screen there, so that's good. Even some sunshine peeking out on Wednesday, it looks like. Excited about that.
Yeah, I am.
All right, Sheriff, we'll see you same time, same place next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.